The sun baked the dusty train station platform of Rattlesnake Ridge, a place where dreams died quietly and no one had time for the weak. People came and went, miners with hard eyes, women selling their services with smiles that didn't reach. Their eyes, merchants, drifters, and the lawless alike. No one noticed the girl at first. She had slipped off the last freight car like a shadow, barefoot and trembling, her hair matted with dirt, skin scraped raw. She couldn't have been more than 17, her dress torn and too thin for the high desert wind. She held herself like someone used to hiding, shrinking from every glance. Her lips were cracked, her steps staggered. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. One arm clutched her side where blood had dried into the fabric. She tried to speak to, ask for water, maybe, but her voice came out hoarse and broken. She dropped to her knees near the telegraph pole, and then collapsed fully onto the wooden planks of the station floor. People saw her fall. They turned, frowned, then turned back to their business. A woman muttered, "Drunk, probably." A man snorted, "Filthy half-breed." No one helped. No one even checked if she was breathing. Except one. He had been sitting on the far edge of the platform, silent and still, like a stone carved by centuries of wind. A giant of a man, broad across the shoulders, with long black hair braided with leather and bone. His skin was coppered and sun-worn. His boots were handmade. His eyes were dark, unreadable. He wore no badge, no hat, and carried no gun that anyone could see, but no one mistook him for harmless. Some said he was Apache. Others said he was a ghost, a warrior who had lost his tribe and now lived alone in the high cliffs. But everyone agreed, don't cross him. He watched the girl crumble. He waited for anyone to lift a hand. When no one moved, he stood. His shadow stretched long across the wooden planks as he approached her. Conversation stilled. A poker game paused mid-bet. Even the sheriff, leaning on his post with a lazy eye on the street, straightened slightly, but didn't interfere. The giant knelt beside the girl and pressed 2 fingers gently to her neck. A faint pulse. Her breath was shallow. Blood crusted on her side. She wouldn't last another hour in the sun. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. For a moment, panic flared in them, but then something in his gaze, in his stillness, quieted her. His voice, when it came, was deep and steady. "You're not dying here," he said. "You're coming home with me." She blinked, lips parted. No one had ever said something like that to her. No one had claimed her. Without asking for help, without looking at the others, the man gently lifted her into his arms. She weighed nothing, a feather after a storm. Her head rested weakly against his chest, and her fingers curled slightly into the worn fabric of his shirt. "Hey now," the station master started, taking a step forward. "She don't belong to—" The Apache turned his head. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The man stopped mid-step and looked away, suddenly fascinated by the dirt at his boots. No one followed as the giant walked down the platform, across the street, and toward the edge of town where the trail forked into the wild. Horses shifted nervously as he passed, as if sensing something old and dangerous moving through the world. The girl, barely conscious, whispered something he didn't quite catch. A name? A prayer? He didn't ask. He only adjusted his grip, made sure her weight was secure in his arms, and continued walking. Behind them, the town resumed its hum. Someone laughed. A train whistled in the distance. Life went on. But a few people, just a few, kept glancing at the trail long after the pair disappeared into the horizon, wondering who she was. And what kind of man would carry a stranger into the mountains without expecting anything in return? They didn't know her story, and they sure didn't know his, but one thing was certain. Something had changed that day at Rattlesnake Ridge. Something. Quiet, but powerful, like a seed buried deep in the earth, waiting for rain. The sun slipped behind the mountains, bleeding gold into the sky. The Apache walked without pause, the girl still in his arms, her head slumped against his shoulder. The road behind them was a thread of dust, the town already swallowed by distance. He hadn't looked back once. Every so often her breath hitched, or her eyelids fluttered. Fever was settling in, and fast. The wound on her side had started to leak again, dark, thick, and worrying. She was losing blood and time. He didn't curse or panic. He only shifted her weight carefully and picked up his pace. His horse was waiting by the arroyo, tied under a rocky outcrop. The animal nickered softly as he approached. With care, he wrapped the girl in a thick wool blanket, then lifted her onto the saddle in front of him. Her head lolled. He mounted behind her, pulling her gently against his chest. The ride into the high cliffs began. It wasn't easy terrain, rugged stone paths, thorned mesquite, switchbacks that could snap an ankle. But the Apache knew it all like the lines in his palm. The trail he took was one few men could ride in daylight, let alone at dusk. He didn't hesitate. As they rode, the girl stirred again, half-conscious. "Water?" she rasped. He didn't speak. He reached to his saddlebag, pulled out a wrapped canteen, and pressed it to her lips. She sipped weakly, coughed, then fell against him again. He felt how cold she was. Her body shivered despite the warmth of the blanket and the heat of his chest. "You stay alive," he said quietly. "You hear me, little one?" The wind answered. She didn't single quotes T. By the time they reached his cabin, it was full night. The place was hidden in a stone basin surrounded by towering cliffs and thick pinyon trees. Smoke from the day's fire still drifted up from the chimney. A mule deer startled and bounded into the brush as the horse approached the fence. He dismounted quickly and caught the girl before she could slip off the saddle. She was dead weight now, lips pale, breath short and ragged. She was slipping too deep. "Not yet," he muttered. Inside, the cabin was plain but solid stone hearth, heavy wooden beams, pelts on the walls, a cot built low to the ground. He laid her on it gently, unwrapped her like a wounded bird, and began working without pause. He stoked the fire until the room glowed orange. Then he gathered herbs, roots, and dried leaves from jars lined neatly on a shelf. He ground them into a paste with water and honey, then cleaned her wound and packed it with care. She whimpered, but didn't wake. He made her drink a bitter tea. Between trembles, it would bring the fever down or fight it, at least. Then he covered her in fur blankets, pulled the cot closer to the fire, and sat down on the floor beside her. Hours passed. Outside, coyotes howled across the ridgelines. An owl called once and went silent. The wind whispered through the trees. But inside the cabin, all was still except for the soft, uneven sound of her breathing. He didn't sleep. He kept a watchful eye on her face, on the rising and falling of her chest, on the twitch of her fingers. He watched for any sign of strength, of surrender, of a choice made in the dark. She didn't know it, but she'd already been chosen. He could have left her at the station, could have walked away like everyone else. He didn't even know her name, but when he'd seen her lying there, small and broken, something in him had remembered a day long ago when he had been the one left bleeding in the dust, and someone had said, "No, not you, not yet." So he said it for her. "You're not dying here." He'd said and he meant it. Whatever happened next, however deep her wounds, however far her spirit had drifted, he would not let her die alone, not while he still breathed, not while he still had a home to carry her to. The fever dreams came in waves. The girl tossed under the fur blankets, soaked in sweat, murmuring words in a language she barely remembered. Her lips moved silently. Her hands flinched at shadows only she could see. Sometimes she wept. Other times she laughed in a way that chilled the Apache to his bones. She was fighting something. He just didn't know what. The Apache remained by her side, barely moving, watching the fire and the girl in equal measure. At times he would place a hand lightly on her forehead, grounding her back to the world. Other times he'd step outside into the mountain air, fill his lungs with pine and silence, and return with more herbs, more wood, more patience. Outside, the cliffs towered like stone sentinels, keeping watch. Inside, she was unraveling. She dreamed of running barefoot, chased, slipping through tall yellow grass. A man shouted behind her. Another laughed, cruel and drunk. She fell. Then came the rope, the hand on her face, the pain in her ribs. She tried to scream, but her voice was gone. She dreamed of her mother's soft brown eyes, worn hands, and a song hummed in their old tongue. Her mother had died of sickness on the reservation, far from the mountains, far from the river they'd once called home. That had been the beginning of the end. She dreamed of blood, smoke, a white flag trampled in the mud, a fire set on purpose, and then, as if pulled from the storm, a different memory returned, faint but real. A shadow leaning over her at the station, not with violence but with strength, with protection. Arms lifting her as if she were worth saving. A voice, "You're not dying here." It steadied her in the darkness. In the real world, her fever finally broke on the third night. The Apache had fed her broth by spoon, forced water between her lips, and stayed up through every hour. When he saw the color returning to her face, he allowed himself a small breath, like the last leaves holding on after a hard wind. She woke on the morning of the fourth day. Her eyes opened slowly, pupils adjusting to the flicker of firelight, and the strange beams of sun breaking through a shuttered window. Her throat was dry, but she managed a whisper. "Where am I?" He turned from where he sat sharpening a blade near the hearth. His eyes met hers, calm, grounded, watchful. "Safe," he said simply. She blinked at him. The blanket weighed heavy on her chest. Her side ached like fire, but she was alive, not dead in the dirt, not in some prison, not tied down or held against her will. "Why?" she croaked. He poured water from a clay jug and held the cup to her lips. She drank. And again she asked, barely audible, "Why'd you take me?" The Apache was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because no one else did." That answer made her eyes sting. She looked away toward the small window where pine needles brushed the sill and birds sang without fear. The air smelled like smoke and earth. It didn't smell like rot or filth or liquor. It smelled like a place a person could be. New. She lay back, exhausted but aware. Her body had been through war, but her soul, that had been lost for months, maybe longer. And yet, in this strange mountain cabin with a silent warrior for company, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Unhunted. While she slept again, deeper now and dreamless, the Apache stepped outside. The trail was quiet. The wind spoke only to the trees. He scanned the distance anyway, out of habit, out of instinct. He had carried many things through these mountains, deer hides, firewood, sorrow, but never someone broken like her. Never someone who looked at him not with fear, but with a question. Why? She would ask again. He knew that. One day soon, she would want to know everything, where he came from, what had driven him to isolation, why he'd risked himself for a stranger. But for now, he'd let her rest. He turned back toward the door, his hand brushing the frame carved with old tribal symbols. He wasn't just keeping her alive. He was preparing her to live. The girl awoke to birdsong and the scent of pine smoke drifting through an open window. For a long while she lay still, staring at the wooden beams above her head, unsure if she was alive or if death had taken a kinder turn than expected. She moved her fingers. Pain answered sharp and real. Her ribs ached. Her lips were cracked. Her side throbbed beneath tight wrappings. She tried to sit up, but couldn't. Not yet. Her body wasn't ready. That's when she heard the footsteps. Slow, steady, barefoot. On wooden floorboards. Her heart jumped in her throat. The man appeared in the doorway, tall and still as a tree. He carried a bowl of something steaming. His long hair was tied back. His dark eyes met hers without question or demand. Just awareness. She couldn't look away. He placed the bowl on a small table beside her cot and crouched beside her. Without speaking, he helped her sit up, sliding an arm behind her shoulders and steadying her. The movement was gentle, practiced. Not a man unfamiliar with caring for the wounded. She expected him to speak, but he didn't. Instead, he dipped a wooden spoon into the bowl and held it to her lips. She hesitated. He waited. Then, slowly, she took a sip. It was thick stew, warm, savory, filled with beans and some kind of wild root. She swallowed. Her stomach twisted in surprise. It had been days, maybe more, since she'd had anything but the wind. She took another spoonful, then a third. Finally, she rasped, "You? Who are you?" He didn't answer right away. Just wiped a bit of broth from her chin with a corner of cloth, then sat back on his heels. "Name's Nahuel," he said quietly. "Means jaguar." She frowned faintly. "You Apache?" He gave a single nod. She searched his face. There was something fierce in his features, cheekbones sharp as flint, eyes dark and deep. But there was no cruelty in them, only distance, as if part of him still lived far from here. "I don't know what to call myself anymore," she admitted. "My name was Awanata." "It means turtle." Nahuel said nothing, but there was the faintest lift at the corner of his mouth. The first expression she'd seen from him. "I was trying to get away," she continued, her voice cracking, "from men who took too much, who burned our camp. I didn't know where to go. Just knew I had to keep moving. Then the train station. I don't remember much after that. You collapsed," he said. "No one helped, so I did." "Why?" His eyes met hers again. Still no anger. Still no demand. Just quiet, simple truth. Because you were meant to keep going. Awanata looked down at the blanket over her lap. She had no family, no home. Her people were gone, some dead, some scattered, some locked behind government fences, stripped of language, culture, dignity. But here she was, in a cabin warmed by fire, fed, bandaged, protected. A strange emotion rose in her chest. Not gratitude, at least not yet. Something sharper, confusion, unease, and underneath it, something that frightened her more than death ever had. Hoped over. The next few days she grew stronger. Nahuel showed her where the water came from down a rock spring tucked behind the cliffs. He taught her which leaves to chew to ease her pain. When she asked questions, he answered them, but never more than needed. He didn't tell stories. He didn't ask hers, but in his silence, she began to feel safe. There was no lock on the cabin door, no ropes, no threats. Just the knowledge that, if she wanted to walk away, she could. She didn't even know which direction the town lay anymore, or if the men who hurt her were still looking. She didn't ask to leave. Instead, she helped where she could, washing, cooking, listening. She watched him carve wooden tools in the evening light, his big hands gentle and precise. She noticed how he always sat facing the door, always aware of the world outside. She asked him once if he slept. "Enough," he replied, one morning. She stepped outside while he was hunting and saw the valley stretch out before her clean. Endless, free. It was the first time in a long while that she didn't feel like prey. She stood there a long time, wind in her hair, and whispered, "Thank you," though he wasn't there to hear it. The sun had just dipped behind the cliffs when Awanata found Nahuel sitting alone on a boulder, sharpening his knife with slow, rhythmic strokes. The air was cool. The birds were quiet. The firewood she carried in her arms made her feel useful, needed, even, if only a little. She dropped the bundle nearby. He didn't look up. "You always sharpen that blade," she said softly, "even when it's already sharp." He paused, glanced at her, then resumed. "Better to stay ready." She sat beside the fire pit. "Were you always like this?" His hand stilled, but his eyes remained fixed on the steel. "Like what?" "Alone, quiet, watching everything like it might bite." He said nothing for a long time. Just let the silence stretch, as if the answer wasn't simple, or maybe too simple. Finally he said, "I had a family once. A woman, a son." Her breath caught. "I used to speak more. I used to smile." She leaned forward slightly, but didn't interrupt. "They took them from me," he said. "Soldiers. When I wouldn't sign their papers. Said they'd relocate us. Said it was safer on the reservation. But they came with fire instead." He looked out toward the trees as if seeing ghosts there. "I buried them myself," he said quietly, then left. Walked into the mountains, stayed. Awanata's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," he nodded once. "So was I for a long time." He sheathed the blade slowly, deliberately. "They say grief is something you carry, like a stone in your chest." He looked at her now directly. "But I say it's like water. At first it floods. Then it seeps into everything, your voice, your steps, your sleep. It becomes part of you. Until you stop fighting it." She stared at the flames, blinking against the sting in her eyes. "I lost my mother to sickness. My father was killed by a drunk white settler who thought we stole a horse. We didn't even own one. Nawal didn't look surprised. I spent a long time thinking if I stayed invisible, I'd survive." Her voice cracked. "But they saw me anyway. They always do." His voice was soft now. "The ones who take never stop seeing. That's how they survive, by feeding on the ones who won't fight back." Awanata turned to him. "And you? You stopped them?" "I stopped some," he said, "but not all. Never all." The flames snapped, casting their faces and shifting, light and shadow. In the silence that followed, something shifted between them. Not pity, not even shared pain. Something else. Recognition. Two people cut from the same wound, stitched back together differently. "You still believe in anything?" she asked. Nawal considered the question. Then he leaned back slightly and looked up at the darkening sky. The stars were beginning to show, cold and ancient. "I believe in the land," he said. "It doesn't lie, doesn't steal. If it kills you, it's honest about it. And people?" He gave a faint, almost bitter smile. "People lie." She nodded slowly. "But you didn't lie to me." "No. Why?" He met her eyes. "Because someone didn't lie to me once. When I was broken, a medicine woman found me in a ravine. I'd been shot, left for dead. She carried me home, fed me, sighed I was still worth something." Awanata swallowed. "You're doing the same for me." Yes. It was the first time she realized he didn't see himself as a savior or hero. He saw himself as passing it on, as honoring a debt to the only person who once believed in him. She stood, walked toward the edge of the cliff, and looked down into the valley. Her voice came out strong, steadier than she expected. "I want to stay," she said. He didn't answer right away. "I can help. I'm not weak anymore." He rose slowly. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said, looking over her shoulder. "That's why it matters." And in that moment, something inside him softened. Just slightly. Like spring loosening. The frost on hard earth. "Then stay," he said. "But learn to fight, because peace doesn't last forever." She nodded. "Then teach me." And he would, because maybe the past couldn't be erased, but maybe it could become the soil for something better. Awanata sat across from Nawal in the fading light, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug of cedar tea. Outside, the crickets had begun their nightly song, and the air had that early autumn bite that whispered of snow hiding just over the ridge. She hadn't spoken much all day. Her body was stronger now. She could gather water, stir soup, even climb halfway up the trail to the ridge, but her soul still carried a weight she hadn't named. Tonight. She was ready. She looked across the firelit cabin at the warrior who had saved her, not just with his arms, but with his silence. He never pried, never pressed. But somehow, he always listened. "I need to tell you what happened," she said, softly. Nahuel nodded once, eyes steady on her face. He didn't interrupt. He just waited. She took a slow breath. "There was a man named Denton Briggs," she began, "a land agent, government-backed. He came to our camp 6 months ago dressed in fancy boots and gold buttons. Said we were trespassing on federal grazing land, even though we'd lived there since before any of their maps existed." Nahuel's jaw tensed slightly, but he said nothing. "He offered my uncle a deal. Promised cattle, cash, even protection if we signed over the land. My uncle said no." Briggs left and came back a week later with 5 armed men and a bottle of whiskey. She stopped. Her grip tightened around the mug. "They beat my uncle in front of everyone, called him a savage. Then they dragged me and 3 other girls away. Said we needed to learn how to be proper before we ended up married off to dirt." Nahuel's eyes darkened. "I escaped on the 3rd night," she said, her voice now a flat echo. "One of the other girls slipped me a blade. I cut the saddle off one of their horses and rode into the dark without shoes, without food. I didn't look back." Her gaze dropped to the floor. "I don't know if the others made it." Nahuel slowly reached over and stirred the fire with a long stick. The crackling grew louder, like the flame itself was furious. "They'll keep hunting me," she whispered. "Briggs doesn't care about me. But if word gets out about what he did about, who saw he'll lose everything. His land, his contracts, maybe even his head. He's connected. Dirty sheriffs, railroad men, a few bounty hunters who'll do anything for silver. And they know your face?" Nahuel asked quietly. "Yes, and they'll come for it." Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of shared pain, of truth finally spoken. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked. She shrugged faintly. "Didn't want to be a burden. I figured if I died out here, at least I'd do it free." Nahuel stood slowly. He crossed the room and took her mug, refilled it from the kettle, and handed it back to her. "Then we don't let you die," he said. "And we don't let them come. You really think we can stop them?" "I don't stop them for you," he said. "I stop them because they burn what they can't control. Because they think the mountains belong to them. Because they think no one will remember." She looked up at him. "And you remember?" "Every damn thing," he said. "That night, Awanata couldn't sleep." She lay under the firs and stared at the ceiling beams, feeling her heartbeat echo in her side. The pain was less now. Her wounds were healing. But something else had cracked open, and now she couldn't close it again. She sat up, walked quietly to the door, and stepped outside. The stars above were endless, cold and bright. The trees whispered around her. Somewhere in the distance an owl called. Nahuel was on the roof, watching the trees like he always did, his bow laid across his knees. "You think they'll come soon?" she asked. "Probably. You'll protect me?" He looked down at her. "I'll teach you to protect yourself." She smiled faintly. "Good." Then she climbed up beside him and sat down beside the warrior, beside the firelight, beside the possibility of a different kind of future. Whatever came next, she wasn't running anymore. The notice went up at dawn. Tacked to the side of the saloon in Rattlesnake Ridge, just beneath the wanted posters for horse thieves and whiskey runners. was a fresh sheet of parchment with heavy black ink. Wanted, Awanata, native female, age. Approx. 17 to 20, for theft, trespass, and inciting violence on federally protected land. Reward, $200 dead or alive. Below the words was a rough charcoal sketch of her face. Her hair messy, eyes wild, mouth caught mid-expression drawn from memory. But recognizable. Sheriff Clyde Dane read the posting aloud, sipping his coffee, then turned to the bounty hunter beside him. That's the one Briggs once cleaned. Up. The hunter, a lean man with a scar running across his jaw and a long-range Sharps rifle slung over his back, grunted. She's just a girl. Girl or not, the sheriff replied, that notice is real, and so's the money. The bounty hunter rolled a cigarette in his fingers. What about the Apache she's with? Dame gave a dry chuckle. Mountain ghost? Some say he's a war chief in hiding. Others say he's half wolf. But I say this, he's big, and he don't miss. The bounty hunter narrowed his eyes. Then I won't either. 2 days later, dust rose along the trail leading into the high cliffs. 5 riders. 1 tracker, 1 bounty hunter, and 2 hired. Guns from the railroad company, men who carried Winchester repeaters, and the stink of easy violence at the head, rode Briggs himself. His coat was pressed, his boots polished, but his eyes were dead. He rode like a man who had never earned his horse but claimed it anyway. He hadn't come to fight, he'd come to a race. She's up there, the tracker said, crouching beside faint hoofprints. Maybe a day's ride more. Briggs spat. Good, let's end this. Up in the mountains, Newell had already felt the shift. The birds were quiet. The trail animals skittish. Even the wind moved differently, slower, more cautious, as if nature itself sensed blood coming. Awanata felt it too. She stood on the ridge beside Nahual, clutching the bow he'd made for her from cured cedar. Her fingers still fumbled the string. But her grip was steadier now. 5 men? She asked. He nodded. Maybe 6. One of them's a hunter. He knows the land, but not like I do. She swallowed. I don't want you to fight them for me. I'm not, Newell said. I'm fighting them because men like that never stop. They take. They burn. They lie, until someone reminds them that fire spreads both ways. He turned to her. You remember what I told you? She nodded. No open ground. No second warning. Don't hesitate. He studied her face. And if they come close, aim low. Arrows won't kill a man through pride, but they'll stop his knees. A slow, approving smile touched his face. That night, they laid traps-thin snares stretched across tight passes, sharp stakes hidden beneath leaves and tripwire that would send loose rocks crashing down the cliffs. Newell moved like he was part of the land, every footstep measured, every knot tied with purpose. Awanata followed close behind. She wasn't as quiet, but she was learning, and when they were done, they waited in the darkness. At dawn, the men entered the canyon. The tracker was the first to go. A hidden pit snapped his leg like a twig, and before he could scream, Newell's arrow buried itself in his throat. The others spread out, guns drawn, eyes wild. Hold your fire. Briggs shouted, flush them out. But they were already surrounded by stone, by silence, by a force they couldn't understand. Awanata's arrow struck one of the railroad men in the shoulder, sending him tumbling backward, shrieking. Newell moved through the trees like smoke. His blade found the second hired gun before the man could even raise his rifle. By the time only Briggs and the bounty hunter were left, the canyon echoed with the sounds of defeat. Briggs stood in the open now, coat torn, hair wild, pistol shaking. In his hand, she's mine, he shouted. That girl belongs to the U.S. government. From the trees, Newell stepped forward, bow drawn. She belongs to no one. Briggs snarled. You'll hang for this, both of you. But even as he raised his pistol, a sharp thwack rang out and Awanata's arrow pinned his hand to the tree behind him. He screamed, dropped the gun, fell to his knees. Nahual walked up slowly, blade in hand. The bounty hunter backed away, hands raised. I was paid? That's all. I didn't know what she was. Nahual's voice was quiet. Then leave. And forget. You ever saw this trail? The hunter didn't argue. He turned and fled. Briggs whimpered. Please, I'll disappear. No more notices. No more men. Nahual stared down at him, then looked at Awanata. What do you want to do? She walked forward. Looked Briggs in the eye. You'll disappear, she said, or next time we won't miss. Then she ripped the poster from his pocket, tore it in half, and let the pieces scatter to the wind. The warning came 3 nights later. A pair of crows circled low over the valley at dawn, unusual for this time of year. The deer didn't return to the creek, and Nahual's mule, usually calm and stubborn, refused to drink from the trough. Something was coming. Awanata felt it too. She had been sleeping lighter each night since the ambush. Her bow now rested beside her cot. Her knife never left her belt. Nahual stepped inside the cabin after scouting the ridge. They're coming back, he said flatly. More men, more guns. At least 10 this time. Maybe more. Awanata stood up. You think Briggs survived? I think men like Briggs always do, Nahual said. They don't fight with their own hands. They just send others to bleed for them. She looked toward the trail. Then this time, we finish it. The 2 of them worked through the night. They reinforced the traps, dug deeper trenches along the narrow paths, and sharpened new stakes. Nahual strung snares between pine trees that could lift a man by the ankle and break his spine on descent. He poured oil into glass jars and tucked them into fire traps rigged with old gunpowder. Awanata strung her own bow. Then a second one. She dipped arrowheads in sap and ash, just as Nahual taught her, to seal the wound and make it burn. They boiled food, stored water, reinforced the walls. Nahual carved narrow shooting holes through the cabin's timber. Not even a full company could rush that cabin head-on and live to tell it. But it wasn't just defense anymore. They weren't just waiting. They were ready. They came at dawn. 15 men, this time armed, uniformed, mounted. U.S. military issue. Not bounty hunters. Not thugs. Soldiers. Briggs had gone to Washington, or maybe Santa Fe, and convinced someone high enough that a girl and a reclusive Apache were a threat to progress. The army wasn't coming for justice. They were coming to bury a mistake. The first shot rang out just as the soldiers reached the mouth of the canyon. Awanata loosed her arrow from a ledge high above. It struck one of the scouts in the thigh, sending him tumbling backward into a rock bed of cactus and thorn. Nahual fired from a separate ridge. His arrow pierced the commander's shoulder, sending the formation into chaos. The men tried to regroup, but the canyon fought back. Trees fell in their path, loosened by snare ropes. Gunpowder traps exploded from hidden rocks, shaking the earth and sending men scattering in panic. They'd underestimated the land. Worse, they'd underestimated its guardians. By midday, 5 men were dead, 3 wounded, and the remaining soldiers had taken cover in the lower pass. Too afraid to move forward, Awanata crouched beside the fire pit, breathing hard, bow in hand. Her arms ached. Her side throbbed from old wounds reopened by adrenaline. Nahual joined her, his face calm, but streaked with blood not his own. You holding? He asked. She nodded. They're boxed in. But they won't run. They're trained not to, he said. So we changed the rules. He pulled out a jar of lamp oil, lit a rag in the fire, and pointed to the pass. You ready to smoke them out? Awanata looked down the trail. For a moment, she saw the girls from her tribe. Her uncle. The night she escaped, the fire, the screams, the silence that followed. She nodded. Light it. Smoke choked the canyon within minutes. The wind on their side for once pushed the thick, oily clouds straight into the soldiers' hiding place. Coughing and shouting echoed from below. And then came the retreat. A final desperate push. They charged up the canyon with rifles drawn, running straight into the final trap, a deadfall of logs, triggered by a single pull of rope. Nahuel waited. Awanata pulled the cord. The logs tumbled like thunder. 3 men crushed. 1 pinned, screaming. The last 2 dropped their weapons and fled into the brush. The siege was over. By nightfall, the mountain was still again. Awanata sat beside the fire with her hands in her lap. Her fingers were blistered, her skin streaked with soot. She hadn't cried, not yet. Nahuel sat beside her, silent as always. They won't stop, she finally said. No, he agreed. But they'll remember. She turned to him. Do you think we'll have to run? He met her eyes. Not anymore. Now they'll be the ones looking over their shoulder. She looked down at her hands. I didn't know I could do this. You? Didn't have to, he said, but you did. She breathed in deeply. The air smelled like pine smoke and scorched earth. But underneath it all, it smelled like freedom. And for the first time, she truly believed it belonged to her. The canyon was quiet again. The earth had buried the blood. The winds no longer carried the scent of gunpowder. Yet the silence didn't feel like a return to peace. It felt like a question waiting for an answer. Awanata stood at the edge of the ridge, staring down at the valley far below. The smoke from the last fire had cleared. The world beyond, the one that had hunted her, tried to break her, erase her, was still out there. Still dangerous. Still vast. But she wasn't the same girl who had collapsed at that station weeks ago. Behind her, Nahuel loaded supplies onto the mule quietly, methodically, as if he were preparing for a long journey. He hadn't asked her to leave, hadn't told her to stay. He had simply given her room to decide. You could be safer in the north, he said eventually. I know people, a family. They'd hide you. She turned around. And you? I don't hide, he said plainly. But I survive. So will you. She crossed the distance between them slowly. If I leave, they win. Maybe not with guns or chains, but they still win. They'll come again, he said. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next winter. But men like that they don't forgive. The ones who escape. I'm done escaping, she said. They ate that night in silence. Squirrel stew with bitter greens and sweet corn. Her appetite had returned in full. Her cheeks had color again. Her eyes were sharper. No longer full of fear now, they held fire. Nahuel reached across the fire and handed her a piece of carved wood smooth, shaped like a hawk in flight. I made it while you were sleeping last week, he said, to remind you of who you are. She turned it in her hand. Who am I? Alive, he said simply. That's enough, she smiled faintly. It's not, though. Not anymore. He waited. I want to build something here, she said. A home. Not just hide. Not just survive. I want to live like my mother did. Like my grandmother. I want people to find their way to this mountain and know it's safe. Nahuel raised an eyebrow. You want to turn this into a sanctuary? Maybe. Not with a fence and a sign, but yes, I do. He leaned back and nodded. Then we'll need more firewood, more traps, and a bigger stew pot. The next morning, she buried the uniform buttons they'd scavenged from the soldiers. Not as trophies, but as warnings. She placed them beneath a stone cairn near the trail, where no rider could miss it. Awanata then walked to the river, her boots crunching on the frost-tipped grass, and sat on the same rock where she'd first let Nahuel wash her wounds. That girl, the half-dead stranger, was gone, she picked up. a sharp rock, and carved her name into the boulder. Slowly, with purpose. A mark that said, "I was here." I still am. Later that day, as Nahuel dug new fence posts along the slope, Awanata approached with her arms full of woven reeds. "I want to build something up here," she said. "What kind of something?" "A garden," she said. "Not for food, for color, for beauty, for remembering." He studied her for a long moment, then returned to his work. "Then you'd better start soon. First frost isn't far off." That night, under a sky full of stars, Awanata lay in her cot, listening to the mountain breathe. She didn't know what the world would throw at her next, or if Briggs still lived, or whether more men would come with rifles and orders. But she did know this. She had made her choice. She would not run. She would not fade. She would stay and build. And when the next girl came down that trail half dead and hunted, she would know exactly where to go. Awanata no longer woke in fear. She woke with purpose. Each morning, she rose before the sun, fed the mule, checked the traps, fetched water from the stream. She moved with quiet confidence, barefoot in the snow-dusted dirt, wrapped in soft buckskin Nahuel had helped her stitch. Her hair, once tangled and matted from days of unconsciousness, now hung in a braid down her back, thick and proud. Nahuel watched from the porch as she worked, carving spears, collecting herbs, strengthening the lean-to that would become a small guest shelter one day. "Look at you," he said. "You were half bones when I found you. Now you walk like a mountain lion." She smiled. "Then they better bring more than guns next time." Word spread slowly, as it always did in the West. Travelers told stories of a girl who survived a bounty, squat and beat back an army patrol with her own hands. They said she rode with the ghost of a warrior, a giant who came down from the high cliffs only when death followed. They called her the girl who refused to die. Some claimed she was cursed. Others called her blessed. But all agreed the trail to her mountain was not one to take lightly. One morning, a boy came. He was no older than 12, dirty, wild-eyed. He didn't speak at first, just stood at the edge of the tree line, staring. At the smoke curling from the cabin chimney, Awanata stepped outside and waited. After several minutes, he took a step forward, then another. When he finally spoke, it was with a cracked voice. "My sister. She ran from a rancher. He's chasing her." "I heard you help people like her." Awanata nodded. "Where is she?" The boy pointed east. "Then we'll go." She sighed. Nahuel appeared at her side as if summoned by the wind. He carried 2 packs and a rifle. The boy blinked. You're both going?" "No one's alone here," Nahuel said. "Not anymore." They found the girl hiding in a dried riverbed, feet swollen, lips split from a rifle butt. She tried to fight when Awanata approached, bit her arm, drew blood. Awanata didn't flinch. "Bite harder if you need to," she whispered. "But I'm not letting go." The girl broke, cried like she was being born again, and Awanata held her through the shaking. They brought her home, fed her, cleaned her wounds, gave her a bed of furs and a place by the fire. And when she asked who they were, Awanata simply said, "Survivors. Just like you." Briggs never came himself, but 2 years later, 5 men did, dressed like lawmen, armed like executioners. They reached the base of the mountain and camped overnight. At dawn, they climbed out. They never reached the top. One turned back after his partner tripped a line and shattered his leg. Another was found a week later, still alive but silent and missing 2 fingers. The last 3 were never found at all. Some said the trees had swallowed them. Others claimed they were buried under cairns marked with feathers and blood. But those who knew better simply said, "She warned them." Awanata stood taller now, not just in strength but in spirit. She had taken the land that tried to kill her and made it sacred, built not just a home, but a stronghold. And in time, others came, quiet women with haunted eyes, orphan boys who flinched at thunder, old men with stories of loss and nowhere else to go. She took them all in, and each night, by the fire, she told her own story, how she had nearly died in the dirt at a lonely station, and how a stranger had lifted her up and said, "You're not dying here." Now it was her voice that said those words. Now it was her arms that caught the broken. On the anniversary of her rescue, Nahuel carved a second hawk, this one larger, wings spread wide, eyes forward. He gave it to her without a word, and she placed it on the highest shelf in the cabin, facing east, toward the world that once hunted her, toward the world that now knew her name. Because if they came again, they wouldn't find a girl. They'd find a warrior. Waiting and ready.